Religious apologists deliberately misportraying atheists and said atheists' personal accounts as to why they do not accept the theistic claim is hardly a new concept. It seems that the repeated failure on part of the apologist is the driving force that leads to videos such as the one we're responding to today, which is titled Why Muslims Leave Islam, uploaded by the YouTube channel FreeQuranEducation. So let's get down to business.
Islam does not come with anything that is irrational, but it does come with things that are supra-rational, i.e., rationality does not and cannot have a role to judge whether it's valid or not. It's beyond the scope of the intellect. Islam does not come with anything that contradicts the intellect, but it comes with things that the intellect might not necessarily understand, even if it does not find illogical. Islam will tell you these things, and it is possible your mind will not fully comprehend, but Islam will never tell you something that goes against, that contradicts the mind that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed you with.
That's some weapons grade word salad right there. That which excludes or is excluded from reason, as per the definition of suprarational, is not rational and thus is irrational by definition. All you are doing here is switching out the prefix of for the prefix of supra, which in no way salvages Islam and its various claims. If your religion excludes reasoning on any of its claims, then what you label it doesn't matter. What matters is the fact that you've excluded reasoning. This is a semantic game that will only convince the most ignorant among humanity. You either have a well-reasoned and evidence basis to believe in X, or you do not. Now that may be open to change with the availability of new information in future, but that belief is still either reasoned or reasonless.
And when you look at the questions that these young men and women, 17, 18, 19, 20, up to the early 20s, they inevitably center around a core group of issues, all of which are modern, all of which are emanating from within a particular cultural paradigm. In other words, the questions that people of our generation are asking never even occurred to the last generation, or the generation before them, or the generation before them, all the way back to the Prophet ﷺ and before. These are questions that modern society is positing. Questions about the existence of God, sexuality and orientation, gender roles. These things did not exist. Society, by and large, accepted these things as truths.
Well, that's a blatant fucking lie if I ever saw one. Hell, even your own damn Qur'an acknowledges this fact in chapter 52, verse 35, which read, quote, "Or were they created by nothing, or were they the creators?" End quote. Now, philosophy recognizes this as simple sophistry today, but the intent and purpose behind said text is what we're interested in. This verse was designed to call into question the rejection of theistic belief through the application of a straw man. Why? Well, one could reasonably assume because there were those who would question Islam, as with all religions before it and ever since. Yes, they were perhaps less frequent than today, or at least less vocal, and that can be chalked up to a number of reasons. For a start, an absence of decent education played a key role in the proliferation of religious nonsense in early civilization. But among that, there was also the violence often targeted at such individuals. Indeed, the Qur'an states the following in chapter 8, verse 39, which reads, quote, "And fight them until there is no more fitna, disbelief, and the religion, all of it, is for Allah. And if they cease, then indeed Allah is seeing of what they do." End quote. The modern age has changed this somewhat, as even though apostates are still being arrested, whipped, and even murdered in the Middle East, Muslims now have a presence everywhere in this global era, and where there are Muslims, there have always been ex-Muslims. To add to this, the advent of the internet and the anonymity it offers allows people in abusive or risky situations to access information they were previously denied and join the conversation. To quote world-renowned apostate Maryam Namazi, "The internet is doing to Islam what the printing press did in the past to Christianity." End quote. So no, questioning God is not something new. What's new is the social connectivity and increasing personal security. As for gender and sexuality, way to prove your ignorance knows no limits. Both transgender people as well as homosexual and bisexual people are thought to have had a deep cultural impact since the late Paleolithic due to the evidence available. So it's not that they came into existence then, just they became a key component of society since the first agricultural revolution and the foundations of early civilization. They then existed relatively unchallenged in different forms throughout different societies all around the globe for the next 8,300 years. Then came in the 4th century Common Era and the Christianization of Rome. Under the Theodosian Code, both trans people and non-heterosexual people were legally outlawed and subjected to public execution. This was applied to the Roman Empire and was then later spread under colonialism. Now, I recently covered both non-heterosexual and transgender history in more detail in 2 recent videos, so I won't delve any further, but I'll link those below in case you want to find out more. The point I'm trying to make is the fact that the claim that these are modern issues is a claim founded in nothing more than either ignorance or dishonesty. Much like questioning God, it's not something new, but rather it's becoming something that won't always get you killed if you're open about it.
And 100 years from now, the questions that then those generations of Muslims will be asking will be completely unknown of, unthought of by the generations of our times. So, instead of being so quick to question Islam, take a step back and be just as questioning of your own questions and where they're emanating from. Instead of just jumping at the Qur'an and saying, why does the Qur'an say this? Take a step back before you get there and ask yourself, why am I asking this particular question and not another one that perhaps 500 or 1,000 years ago was at the forefront of people's minds? And when you start contextualizing yourself, look, you and I, both of us, we are products of a particular civilization, of a particular code of conduct, ethics, morality, of a particular paradigm. And the questions that are being spoon-fed to us by the context that we live in, we also should be brave enough to challenge those questions. Why are we not brave enough to challenge those questions, even as we're brave enough to challenge the Qur'an? Those questions will change. The Qur'an will remain, as we know, unchanged.
Which Qur'an will remain unchanged? There are literally dozens of Qur'ans today, each slightly different in the language used and through that the very message said Qur'an conveys. Likewise, there are various types of Islam, and within those types we have multiple schools of thought. So the idea that the Qur'an exists in some unchanging state is already falsified. As for questions changing with the times, so what if that's true? That doesn't mean that the questions now can be discarded. Just because I'll ask my partner, what would you like for dinner, later in the day, does not then remove the importance of the question, are you feeling okay? You look a little peaky. Sure, the question changes dependent on the focus of the conversation and the social context, but so what? Also, the questions you highlight don't exist as part of the Qur'an. Said book is not important enough to be the center of said questions. These questions exist in a society that is becoming more aware of demographics previously treated with unending brutality.
This great theologian, Ibn Taymiyyah, he actually critiques this notion that reason alone will always arrive at the truth. And he brings forth such beautiful examples. First and foremost, the impossibility of even defining what is reason, what is rational, what is intellectual. What might be intellectual for us was not intellectual a generation ago. What might be rational for us was not rational 100 years ago. Rationality itself changes from society to time to place. And there is nothing that we can judge rationality by in and of itself. In fact, in our own lives, how many times have we undertaken a course of action thinking this is so logical, this is so reasonable, this is so the correct decision. And the next day, the next week, the next month, the next year, we look back and we say, what a dumb decision I made. How could I have been thinking that? We ourselves experience this. So how then can we take quote-unquote reason to be something above and beyond anything, always deriving ultimate truths from that?
We don't, since your straw man isn't indicative of reality. Reasoning is not described as a perfect path giving us the correct answers without fail. It is described as the most pragmatic methodology for working towards said truth, truth being defined as that which can be demonstrated to be so, and knowledge being an item or belief held via said method. And it's true. Reasoning has changed over the ages. Advances in philosophy and logical discourse have improved the methods by which we reason, advancing us as a species as it does, at least those of us who adhere to reasoning. Sure enough, reasoning can lead you to the wrong conclusion, but it will always lead you to a better conclusion than without it, and only with reasoning do you have a purpose to correct your errors and update your thoughts. If you picked a position based on a whim without evidence to begin with, there is no purpose, and that's not a good quality. It was improvements in structured and cooperative reasoning that led to science taking us from simple combustion engines to space travel in the space of a few centuries. Meanwhile, the abandonment of reasoning results in societal ignorance and scientific stagnation without fail. With proper education at the very foundation of decent reasoning, all of society prospers. Simply abandoning reasoning and proclaiming to have ultimate truth doesn't help you. That's just an assertion.
Now, does this mean, as I said, that Islam has nothing to do with reason? No, not at all. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us to think, to ponder. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Qur'an to make tafakkur, tadabbur, tadhakkur of His signs. But if you look at the Quranic commands to think and reflect, the Qur'an never tells you challenge Allah's revelation. Rather, the Qur'an addresses non-Muslims and says, think, is Islam true or not? Think, is the Prophet true or not? Think, is this book, the Qur'an, from Allah or not? Once you come to the conclusion that the Qur'an is the book from Allah, that the Prophet Muhammad is a true prophet, that's where you use your mind. Once you admit and submit that the Qur'an is the book from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then you are not supposed to question each and every minutiae and law and wisdom.
Which is a simple trap, since the vast majority of Muslims are not converts. They were simply people who were raised in Muslim households which gave harsh punishments for any severe contest to the family belief. But even if everyone who was Muslim had actual knowledge of what the Quran says and its numerous flaws and errors found within, why would an all-powerful God then force them to abandon said critical thought? This is like the second-hand car salesperson trying to get you to sign the dotted line on the as-is contract, because once they have you signed away, there's no backing out. It shows both a lack of conviction and a lack of efficacy. A truly all-powerful God who cared about leading his people to truth would never do such a thing. The very idea that God would first deliberately create a world in which we couldn't understand his creation and his design, and then outright forbid any attempts to do such, is simply the wizard ordering Dorothy to step away from the curtain. This screams of the Quran's author seeking to save his own skin in decrying any real test from within, as when said criticism comes from outside, it's simply palmed off as people being ignorant of what the Quran says. So if the criticism comes from within, you can ignore it. If the criticism comes from without, you can ignore it. It's a really good display of just how intellectually bankrupt Islam and its preachers like this really are.
We will never understand why we pray 5 times a day and not 4 or 6 times. There's no clear-cut answer we can give. We will never understand why we perform wudu in a certain manner, why we have to do 1 ruku' and 2 sajdas in every rak'ah. It might not be something that is fully understood rationally, but neither is it irrational. It's not against reason. It's there. You just submit. Now, if somebody were to say, I don't understand the wisdom in 5, well, tough luck. You've accepted the Quran. We're assuming you have accepted the Quran. You've accepted the Quran. You must accept it as a package deal. So, reason has a role and a place to guide you to the fact that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is a prophet. And the Quran is the book from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Once you submit to that, then you accept the package deal. And if you look at the questions that these young men and women ask, they're always about fiqh issues of a relatively minor nature. Why does Islam allow this? Why does the Quran say that? And they're all things to do of a legal nature. They're not to do with the basics or the essence of theology. And we do not judge the validity of a religion based upon the minutiae laws. How can Islam be true when we have to pray 5 times a day? That's not how we judge Islam. We judge Islam based on what? On theology, on purpose of life, on the fact that the Quran is a book from Allah. Once we've established that these things are true, we then accept the message as it is.
Okay, the straw man here has just reached a whole new limit. Now, I imagine that some people are curious as to the whole 5 times a day thing, and that I can understand. But this preacher who seemingly has no love for honesty keeps harping on about this very small issue, a quirk if you will, and with it brushes under the rug the whole topic of why does the Quran allow for / command this? It's pretty disgusting when you come to know that the this people are often talking about is genocide, slavery, and rape. The idea that these are just minutiae simply reveals just how ethically foul Islam and its apologists really are. Though I do find a little joy in the fact that you pretty much admit that theology has no presence at the table when it comes to the conversation of ethics. Now I agree, but for entirely different reasons. You're doing so to try and protect Islam from criticism on behalf of ethics. I do so to protect ethics from the corruption of Islam, thus protecting the rest of society. But returning to the video as a whole and how it's meant to explain why Muslims leave Islam, I've got to say, it actually does that. Now I don't mean this in the way that what the person is stating is true and accurate, but rather what they're doing right here is part of the phenomenon. Rather than address the reality of ex-Muslims and their core issues, such as the very fact that there exists not a shred of evidence for the existence of your God or the previously mentioned ethical concerns, instead apologists just set out to lie about them. The failure here works twofold in confirming that Islam has no leg to stand on under scrutiny, as well as the fact that Muslim apologists will not hesitate to lie about their opponent to try and soothe the doubts of the still unquestioning herd. In short, with all of its flaws and all of its errors on part of the presenter, this was a masterclass in how Islam creates ex-Muslims with its very nature. Hi there. I'd just like to say a few things here at the end of the video before you go. First of all, I'd like to thank everyone who's ever donated to the channel via Patreon, giving a special thanks to the following people: Hannah Banghart, Mafia Kovac, John Schoenrock, Daniel Martinez, and Alexander Williams. Your support has ensured this channel its ability to grow over the years. I'd also like to ask that you comment down below and like this video, as well as subscribe, hit the bell icon, and follow Essence of Thought on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Please also consider following Atheist Alliance International on Facebook, a humanist organisation dedicated to helping atheists around the globe. Lastly, I'd like to request that you treat the people responded to in this video with a reasonable degree of respect. Whilst we understand that there are justifiable limits to said respect when tackling certain heavy topics and anger can be a very genuine emotion in fighting injustice, any comments utilising language which insults others on the basis of perceived gender, sexuality, ethnicity or ability both mental and physical will be removed immediately, and the commenter may be blocked on the moderator's discretion. Let's work to keep this space one which upholds the values of humanism. Thank you.